Hey Sajjelers! One of my favorite artists of all time, Omar Offendum, was here in Sydney touring and performing, and we got to interview him for Sajjeling. Check it out.
It is the archetype for every single star-crossed lover's tale. Back in school when we first got up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's an Arab superhero, and he came to bring change, unite the divided and free from the chains of the tyrants who reign in vain and pain. Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's an Arab superhero. Yeah, I know it sounds strange, but the only thing keeping us from going insane is knowing you'll be back again.
I'm curious actually, thinking about, for example, your parents in this case, clearly instilling in you guys a sense of heritage and language was obviously quite an important thing to them. So what was their reaction when you just came up one day and you were just like, hey mom, dad, I'm gonna be a poet and a rapper, or was that something that, you know, just again progressed naturally, so you never really had the talk?
I mean, well, in my case, it was just mom, you know. My father had passed when I was quite young, but what was interesting was that one of the first recordings that I ever made, I brought to my sister's house, to my elder sister. Let her hear it, and she was like super excited. She understood it. It wasn't difficult for her to kind of like reconcile that her little brother was doing this. She saw me listening to rap music my whole life, so. And then my mom walks in the room and she hears this music and she's like, who is this African-American rapper talking about Palestine, you know? And my sister was like, it's your son, you know?
Right here.
Yeah, right here. I think it was definitely maybe a bit surprising and shocking, but then the more she saw me really try to infuse my culture and heritage and my experience into what I was doing, the more respectful she became of it, and the more she started to admire it, you know. And that way it became this really beautiful thing that we share now, you know, especially the poetry piece. My mom studied Arabic literature and poetry. She's the one who first really introduced me to Nizar Rabbani and all these people, and so it became our way of kind of maintaining that linkage and that love, you know. And so if anything, it's helped us a lot, you know. Of course, I know that's not necessarily the case for a lot of young Arabs or Muslims who do engage with rap music and find themselves like trying to maybe fit into the more kind of stereotypes of what a rap artist has to be, and that can be difficult, and I understand that, you know. In the early days of what I was doing, I had a bit of that as well, but I just realized, man, like what's so central to hip-hop culture is keeping it real, you know. And if I were to keep it real about my experience and my heritage, it would be, you know, bringing it to this music in an honest way. I've been very fortunate to have positive feedback from everybody, not just Arabs, you know. So it encouraged me and it validates me and it keeps me going.
What I've seen here is that there tends to be, or there can be, a lot of stigma around, let's say, people of certain ethnic backgrounds, or let's talk about Arabs in this case, wanting to become artists or poets and things, and there is stigma around that because that's not the chosen or perfect career path that, you know, our parents who, you know, often migrated to places like Australia have wanted for us, because, you know, it's not the stable path. So
no, I get
it's interesting to and refreshing, to be honest, to hear something that is actually, you know, an experience that has had an encouragement behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to point out though, I studied architecture, I worked for an architecture firm for 10 years, and so if you ask my mom for a very long time, she would say, he's an architect, but he also raps, you know? Whereas I would be like, I'm a rapper, but I happen to work for an architecture firm. So it's a little perspectival shift, but it's, over the last couple of years, I've actually been doing this full time, and I'm very proud of that, and she's proud of that, and, you know,
it's great for us. So in 2012, you released quite a fiery, you know, or fired up anti-regime, anti-Assad song called Syria, filled with the chant.
Hashtag Syria.
Oh, hashtag, I apologize. Hashtag Syria. How could I get that wrong? Genuine fail. Filled with the chant Ashad Yurid Isqat al-Nizam. The video caption was Desmond Tutu's famous quote, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, then you have chosen the side of the oppressor." So looking back on the 4 years of, you know, the devastating ongoing conflict, what are your thoughts on Tutu's words now?
Well, my thoughts on Tutu's words are that I'm very proud that I spoke up at the time that I did. It wasn't easy, you know, given that my family was there, and I faced a lot of backlash both within the Arab and Muslim community, the Syrian community, who didn't agree with me at the time, and at the same time I got a lot of support. But we've come this far, and it's really sad to see how much it's just taken such a horrible turn for the worse. And of course, for the people who were against the idea of writing that song or putting that song out, they say, "Oh, I told you so." But I completely disagree with that notion. I mean, I think what happened there was me being so inspired by what I saw as a very beautiful, organic, peaceful protest movement by young people in Syria to want to rise up against this regime that had held us and our parents and grandparents in many respects down for so long. And it was met with just brute force and brutality right away. And so the things started to shift, and I wrote a song recently called "Crying Shame," where it's like reflecting back on it, and I don't regret anything that I said. Absolutely, I stand by all of it, and at the same time, it's not surprising. These types of regimes and these types of corrupt systems will do anything that they can to stay in power, and they'll get help from anybody that they can to stay in power. And I know it's a complicated issue, and I know that at this point it's very polarizing. And I realized, through those years of doing it over these last several years, that I never wanted to be a divisive voice. If anything, I want to help bring people together. So even in this difficult time where I feel like people kind of had the wrong impression about this revolution from the jump, I still give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm willing to have these conversations. I'm willing to engage in a healthy way, not with trolls online, but just in person. Because that's the only way we can ever kind of move forward. Another thing you learn from South Africa is reconciliation. And so I pray, inshallah, that's somewhere we can go. I mean, it's very difficult to even begin to talk about that now, given how much loss and how much sacrifice, has been made. But let's be honest, if we want any bit of Syria left for us and for our children and our grandchildren, that's going to be something that we have to face at some point. Yeah.
One piece of advice for the trolls: just block. I think you're familiar with that.
That's
one.
what it's there for. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned divisiveness, actually, because as I'm sure you're familiar, hip hop is familiar with. Hip hop is a genre that's quite steeped in with political history. So do you feel that rapping about East versus West politics then can leave you with a very limited niche audience? So, for example, are you preaching to the converted, would you say, with your politically conscious music? And if so, then why are you doing it at all?
That's a really good question, and I don't think that I'm necessarily preaching to the choir. Maybe in the early days I was, but now I find myself in places and spaces where there's a lot of people who either A, disagree with me, or B, have no idea about what's happening and want something to kind of be able to make sense of it. So, my music, my poetry, my just presence in a lot of these places can kind of help, start that process. And I guess the older I get, the more that kind of East-West dichotomy, which by the way, being in Australia, how is that West? I don't even understand. But I get Western is a concept, or a way, a frame of mind, but it starts to melt away, and you realize on these extremes, the quote-unquote extremists, whether they are the arms dealing, warmongering kind of far right, or the I don't know, just really kind of stale, too comfortable in their binaries, extreme left, it's they almost have more in common, than the majority of people in the middle. And those are the people who I'm trying to speak perhaps for, even to a certain degree, when they don't feel like they have an opportunity to. And I hope that it's just going to help be one voice within the collective effort of moving us towards something positive. I don't think that I myself alone can do it. I don't think, and I'm not so naive as to think that even one song can change the world, but it's really a part of this continued, sustained effort. And time is on our side. I think I'm getting older now, but I'm looking at younger people who are carrying the torch, and we're moving in this, inshallah, in this positive way forward. And that's all I can hope for.
Well, labels can definitely be very confining, and I mean, you mentioned earlier how you sometimes are called, angry Arab men, or that you're assigned that voice or that role.
Or soft Arab dude from the Arabs who don't think I'm angry enough. I really don't care.
Sure,
but,
either way, you can't please everyone. But it's interesting because I guess then I guess then these days that whole label of angry Arab man, is that something that you as a let's say brown voice, are you expected to be angry and expected to be particular? And if so, do you feel that then denies you universality in your art? So for example, people are going to take your love songs less seriously than perhaps your political songs, where to you they might be just as equally as important, or maybe the love one even more important. So how do you kind of reconcile that?
I mean, at a certain point, you just have to realize as an artist that like it's really this personal journey of maturity and reflection, and if you let in too many of these other voices into your process, it's just going to confuse and dilute the message. And so, I'm on this course, I'm moving in a direction that's healthy and important to me, and I get support from the people who matter to me. Everything else is just this, digital echo chamber of ego that I'm not interested in engaging in at all. So again, you just hit block, or you just don't even think about it. But what's interesting about the quote-unquote angry piece, or even just masculinity and posturing, that's a conversation that happens in hip-hop. It's a conversation that happens within this like Arab Muslim kind of frame of mind. It's a conversation that happens within American and Australian kind of, what does it mean to be a man, and it's like, what's interesting to me is that because of my personal experience growing up, my mom taught me how to be a man, so for that reason, I have, I think, this overwhelming amount of respect and affinity for people who don't kind of feel like they have to stick to these traditional notions of masculinity. At the same time, I think not a lot of people have that opportunity to see things that way, and so I'm very blessed for that. But what's amazing to me is that from artists like Nizar Qabbani and Mahmoud Darwish all the way back to examples like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have all these incredible stories of people who break that mold, and who are not ashamed to cry when something sad happens, or to like reflect on things in a healthy and cathartic way, and so that's important.
Well, okay, so this question is probably a little overdone, and probably come across it quite a bit, but I would say that poetry as resistance is kind of, from what I've seen, a fairly new concept to migrant communities in Australia, or something that we have seen a lot of poets take up, so I'm a resistance poet, or I use my art as my resistance. So I'm interested to know if you would call your art resistance, and especially since you make reference to, obviously in a lot of your songs, the Arab uprisings, regardless of what turn they've taken. So I want to know, are you trying to incite revolution, basically? And if so, or if not, then what does political change, or what does change even look like to you?
Well, that's a lot to unpack in that one. But